Okay, last two times, we talked about what happens when you introspect, when you look into your mind. And what you discover when you do that is that your mind is full of various kinds of qualitative states, thinking and feeling and wanting things and seeing things and hearing things and all of that. And psychologists and other cognitive scientists, no less than philosophers, have been bothered by how to figure out what those basic qualitative states are and what their nature is. And I talked last time about some of the empirical approaches to the problem of qualia. What I want to do for the next couple of days is to talk about another philosophical problem of consciousness, but we're not going to stick with the philosophy, okay? I'm not a philosopher. I don't even play one on TV. This isn't a philosophy course, and I've had no training in philosophy, so you're not going to get great insights into philosophical conundrums from me. But we do have this problem set for us, basically a scientific problem set for us by the philosophers, which is known as the mind-body problem, and is nicely phrased by Thomas Nagel, he of the Bat essay, the following quote: "Consciousness is what makes the mind-body problem really intractable. Without consciousness, the mind-body problem would be much less interesting. With consciousness, it seems hopeless." Okay, what would it mean by having to have a mind-body problem without consciousness? Well, you can think about the mind as just an input-output device, like your computer or something like that, that takes inputs from the world, transforms them, generates them, processes them somehow, and then generates outputs of some form of behavior without there being anything like a qualitative state involved, without there being anything like a mental state involved. And so that's pretty easy to think about. And it's pretty easy to think about because we have things like robots and computers and drones and all of that are just like that. They take inputs and they generate outputs. With consciousness, it seems hopeless. And what Nagel is talking about there is that it just seems to be not at all clear, A, how consciousness gets involved in this, okay, how it is that we become conscious of what we're perceiving and what we're doing, and second, what role consciousness might play in what goes on. This is the legacy of Descartes, okay, who gave us this mind-body problem with his philosophical doctrine of mind-body dualism. And what Descartes was all about here was, what he was trying to do is to understand how it is that you could have mind and body, and who's got a mind and who doesn't. The first thing Descartes did was to argue for a strict separation between humans and animals. Descartes was a devout Catholic. He got into trouble with the hierarchy from time to time, but he was a devout Catholic. And he argued that humans had something that was very special and that animals did not have. He construed animals as unconscious reflex machines. You could hit your dog, to use his example, and the dog might bark and might yelp or whatever, but the dog didn't have any mental states. He was just operating on reflex in some kind of mechanical fashion. Humans, and humans alone, by virtue of our special properties, have something else. We have free will and consciousness, which frees us from reflex and allows us to be both aware of what's going on, aware of the pain when somebody hits us, for example, and to engage in consciously controlled, deliberate, voluntary behaviors of a sort that's just not available to animals that are operating merely as reflex machines. The particular version of dualism that Descartes articulated is known as substance dualism. There are actually two things going on here. First is what is now called substance dualism, which is simply the statement that mind and body are two completely different things that are composed of two completely different substances. Bodies are characterized by extension. They are material, they are composed of material substances, and being composed of material substances, they take up space. That's what extension means for Descartes. But mind is immaterial. It is not composed of any kind of material substance. It doesn't have extension. It doesn't take up space, and it's characterized by thought, by which Descartes really meant all sorts of mental states. So first you've got this proposition that mind and body are two completely different things qualitatively. But Descartes also argued that mind and body interacted with each other. So he's not just a substance dualist, he's what's known as an interactive dualist. Descartes thought that we got some knowledge innately from God. Remember, he was a devout Catholic. But he also agreed that we got some of our knowledge through experience, so that we acquire knowledge through our sensory organs, the ears and the eyes and all the other sensory organs that we have allow us to acquire empirical knowledge of various sorts. So the fact that minds are full of knowledge, much of which is acquired through the body, was one way in which mind and body interacted. The other way in which mind and body interacted was that we were able to use our thoughts to control our bodily organs. My desire to kick this podium creates the action of my leg of kicking the podium. My desire to change the slide, or my lack of desire to change the slide, controls my hands in various kinds of ways. So mind and body are different, but they interact in various ways, and those were just kind of more or less assumed states of affairs for Descartes. But this interactive dualism of Descartes led him into a particular problem, which comes to be known as the Cartesian impasse, which is simply this: how in the world is an immaterial substance going to affect a material substance? How are you going to do that? Okay. Now, Descartes didn't have a solution to this problem. Nobody has so far, really. But he had the beginnings of a solution, so he thought. He thought that however it occurs, that mind and body can interact, thoughts can affect the behavior of things in the material world, and vice versa. It all comes together in the pineal gland, in the brain. So that's where, whatever it is that goes on, this interaction between mind and body occurs in the pineal gland. And he chose that for a couple of pretty good reasons. First off, the pineal gland has a really nice location, pretty much in the center of the brain. So if you were going to say, well, where does mind and body interact, you wouldn't put it in your earlobe, you wouldn't put it in your toenail, you'd put it in your brain, and dead center seems kind of right, okay? The second point for Descartes was that there's only one of it, okay? Descartes knew already from anatomy that the brain is composed of two hemispheres. There are more or less mirror images of each other, and the various lobes have their left and right and all of that. But there seemed to be only one, the pineal gland. And again, he said, you know, if you're going to have mind and body interact, it's got to take place in just one place, right? You can't have these two things. And then finally, he thought that the pineal gland was uniquely human. When people did anatomy of the brains of other creatures, they didn't find pineal glands. So again, if only humans have minds, and mind and body have to interact somehow, then you're going to want a structure in the body that is unique to humans, because dogs and cats don't need it. Okay? So those are the reasons. Descartes was, for those of you who haven't taken a basic human neuroanatomy course, wrong on all three counts. Okay? Well, location is kind of in the center of the brain, but even the pineal gland is divided into lobes, and it's not uniquely human. Lots and lots of animals have them, including birds. But that doesn't matter. He was trying. Okay? He was trying to figure out how it could possibly be that mind and body interacted. And this is a puzzle that has stuck with philosophers for a really long time. Now, why has it stuck with philosophers for a really long time? The answer is that dualism is just really appealing to us, okay? First, it's not just devout Catholics who think on religious grounds that something like dualism must be right. There are lots of religions in the world that argue that there's something like a soul that separates human beings from other creatures. And over the years, the term soul got translated into mind, got translated into consciousness. So deep-rooted religious beliefs lead us to embrace some kind of dualistic posture, as you'll see in a second. Setting aside religious doctrine, simply our ordinary garden variety folk psychology suggests that we have minds and bodies and that they're somehow different from each other. That's the essence of substance dualism. But we also understand that minds and bodies interact with each other. We understand that if you close your eyes, you're not going to find out what's going on out in the world there through vision. And we also understand that if we're going to use our minds to engage in various kinds of behavior, that the thoughts and the desires and the feelings that go through our minds have to be translated into bodily movements somehow. So dualism persists not just as religious doctrine, but it also persists as what's known as folk psychology. That is, the everyday psychology that people in the ordinary course of everyday living use to explain what they do. And then finally, it's not just folk psychology, but it's also scientific psychology that, I'd argue anyway, is inherently dualistic because psychology as a science is based on a philosophical doctrine known as mentalism. And what mentalism says is that mental states stand in relation to action as cause to effect. That is to say that our actions are caused by our mental states. It's our beliefs, our feelings, our desires that cause us to act in the way we do. So if you want to understand somebody's behavior, what you have to understand is how his mind works. You have to understand what he's thinking and why he's thinking, what he wants and why he wants it. So this kind of dualistic posture that says we can try to understand mental life in and of itself without resort to physiology or biology or whatever, that's basically that is the fundamental stance of psychology that we've had at least since the time of William James. So dualism isn't a stupid idea, okay? Dualism is, in fact, the default idea, right? It is what comes to us naturally, just as thinking, feeling, wanting creatures. And so ever since Descartes, people, philosophers and others have wrestled with this relationship with mind and body and tried to come up with various kinds of solutions that get us around or through, one way or the other, Descartes' impasse. So, for example, there arose in the wake of Descartes a wide variety of versions of dualism. Again, this isn't a philosophy course. We're going to run roughshod through this. I know these are more complicated than what I'm going to say, but they're not all that more complicated. And if you want some details, it's in the lecture supplements.